Yo, what's going on, guys? It's JMS, and I'm back again with another dope New England adventure. So you guys might be wondering to yourselves, JMS, what are you doing on the beach on such a freezing cold February day? I do admit it's very cold today and very windy, so I apologize in advance for the wind. But nonetheless, it's a gorgeous day out today. You got the clear blue sunny skies, the glistening beautiful ocean right behind me, and we actually have a very interesting and cool abandoned location in store today. I'm actually going to the ruins of an abandoned military fort. This thing was actually constructed by the United States Army all the way back in 1901, and although it's been abandoned for quite some time, a lot of the remnants are still left behind for us to explore. I'm of course referring to Fort Mansfield. Fort Mansfield is one of many harbor defenses along the US East Coast, and this one actually protects the Long Island Sound. The ocean directly behind me is the Long Island Sound, and this fort was one of many used to protect New York City in case of a naval attack. Of course, I'll go into a little more background history and information on this as the video progresses, but I do want to let you guys know a little bit more about this location I'm in. So right now I'm actually in Westerly, Rhode Island. Westerly is of course a small beach town, and it's actually the southwesternmost point of Rhode Island, actually right next to the border of Connecticut. Westerly, Rhode Island does border the Long Island Sound, as I stated, and I'm actually on a very long barrier beach called Napatree Point. As you can see, this thing has quite some distance, very long beach that stretches out into the ocean, and Fort Mansfield is at the very tip of Napatree Point. So I'm just making my way along this beach, and yeah, we're gonna get right into it. I'm excited to explore Fort Mansfield. I've known about this place for quite some time, and you guys know how I love abandoned military forts. I think they're really fun and interesting pieces of history to explore. But anyways, if you guys like exploring and seeing this kind of abandoned content, be sure to follow me on Instagram at JMassOfficial. That's at JMassOfficial. I post all the stuff I'm doing, all the sites I'm seeing, all the things I'm exploring on Instagram at JMassOfficial. And Fort Mansfield here in Westerly, Rhode Island will be no different. I'll be posting that there. But anyways, guys, let's get into it. I'm very close to the fort now, about at the tip of Napatree Point, and I think this is going to be a cool one, so let's check it out. So I just made my way through the thick brush, and I've officially arrived at Fort Mansfield on the tip of Napatree Point in Westerly, Rhode Island. Already this abandoned fort reminds me of many other abandoned forts I've been to in New England, and there's a reason why. So as I stated earlier, this was one of many harbor defenses built along the US East Coast in the early 20th century. And this is actually part of something called the Endicott Board. So the Endicott Board was published by the US government in 1885, and it basically established a new construction project that would result in the creation of many naval seaside forts all along the US East Coast to protect major cities. In the case of Fort Mansfield here, it was meant to be one of the starting points of the Long Island Sound to protect New York City, which was still the largest city in the United States at the time. So Fort Mansfield was constructed in 1901, the early 20th century, and it didn't actually last that long, which is surprising. I'll go into more detail later, but Fort Mansfield was a very short-lived military base. Now that being said, it still was a full-force military base right on the edge of the Long Island Sound, and it actually housed many guns. I don't remember all the names off the top of my head, but I will list below the guns that Fort Mansfield actually had on its batteries. So as you can see, this is a pretty decent sized fort, and it kind of reminds me of Fort Weatherhill, which is actually another Rhode Island fort in Jamestown, Rhode Island. Kind of gives me that vibe. You can see right here, it's got the batteries. It's got some rooms inside, which I'm hoping we can get into. Pretty cool looking fort. But as I said, this thing was built in 1901, part of the harbor defenses of the Long Island Sound, and was one of many East Coast forts built under the Endicott Board. Now these forts stretched all the way up to Maine, and I've actually been to a few of those too. If you look on my channel history, you'll see I've been to a couple other abandoned forts. We have quite a lot of them in New England itself. All right, what do you say we get down there and get exploring? All right, guys, so I just made it down to the ground level of Fort Mansfield, and I figured, yeah, why not explore it, check out what's going on here. So there actually is a way to get down below, as you can see right here. There is a basement level to this fort. I quickly scoped out this fort a little bit before filming, mainly because there's actually a few other people here right now. I guess this is a pretty popular hotspot in the area. So I met a few other people. They showed me the basement, which you can actually access right here, and it is extremely flooded. There's a lot of water down there. I don't know how much I can really cover, but I will head down there eventually. But I think for now, I'm just gonna show you guys the ground level of Fort Mansfield. Now, as you can see so far, covered in graffiti, a lot of it actually, in a very ruined state. This thing's actually been abandoned since the late 1920s, and I'm gonna go into a little bit of detail why that happened and how that happened. You can actually see right here, these are one of the remnants of the batteries, and a battery, of course, is where, you know, the fort would hold its guns, you know. They used to have big guns, big cannons here. That's where they were held, at a battery. And this thing is pretty decent size. It's not the biggest fort I've been to, but it's still pretty big. I'm sure this held up a fight if a naval attack ever occurred. Let's make our way over here. Got some more. This is the other side of Fort Mansfield. And you can take another sneak peek down below into the basement. Pretty cool so far. And yet again, another battery here, completely overgrown with plants and vegetation. At one point, there were massive cannons held right here. Pretty crazy to think about that. So here's the question. Why was Fort Mansfield abandoned? You know, what caused its downfall? So as you probably know, a lot of forts, kind of like this one, have these things called war games. Yeah, it's basically where the militaries will hold mock battles or mock wars on the forts, basically just to test their efficiency and if they would hold up against a real enemy attack. Now, there was a war game being held at Fort Mansfield in 1907, and they basically found out that this fort would not hold up against enemy attacks. It actually had a massive flaw. Basically, what the flaw was is that if enemy ships approached this this fort from a dead angle, which basically meant a section where the gunfire wouldn't cover, they could basically completely bombard this fort with ammunition. So this fort basically had a blind spot, and the guns and cannons could not cover that blind spot, leaving it open to enemy attack. So because of this, the fort was pretty much abandoned in 1909. It did still have some crew, it did still have some guns left over, but by World War I in 1917, all of the guns were removed, and in 1928, the fort was officially abandoned. So it did take some time, you know, around 2 decades to officially liquidate the fort, but it was eventually abandoned because of its fatal flaw, the blind spot that left it open to attack. And now we're heading into the dark depths below Fort Mansfield, the basement. I just walked down these stairs that lead from the ground level to the basement, and you'll already see that it is completely flooded with water. So walking in this area is going to be very tricky. I'm going to have to basically rock hop to make my way through. But yeah, there's a lot of water covering this thing, as you can see. But still a very cool basement level for Fort Mansfield. So as I did mention, this fort has basically been abandoned since 1928. It was really only operational for, a couple of years, little under a decade, in its full force from 1901 to 1909. And basically because of that fatal flaw where it had a blind spot and was open to enemy attack and being bombarded by ammunition, basically made this fort, well, not really fortified. In actuality, it was a pretty weak fort, Fort Mansfield, but still a really cool thing, and the remnants left behind are interesting. Now here's the question, can I make my way over here? I think I can. Wow. Be careful if you come here, it is absolutely flooded. All right, we made our way up here. I don't know if you remember from that other segment, but when I peered down from the ground level, we were actually looking down here. Pretty cool. Wow, this place is just covered in water. By the way, I did mention this a few minutes ago, but there's actually quite a bit of people here, which is kind of crazy for a cold February Saturday, you know what I mean? Like there's actually a lot of people here at Fort Mansfield, pretty crazy. So I ran into a couple people while I was here. I'm not the only one exploring this fort. I really didn't expect that. I thought I would be alone. But I'm sure during the summer, this place is packed. Oh man, this is like rock hopping to get around here. Let's see what's down here. Got another section of the basement. So this is the dead end. Actually pretty small basement to be honest, but still cool nonetheless. Huh. All right guys, I think that's it for the basement. I'm gonna head up top again. We'll do one more walkthrough of Fort Mansfield, and then there's one more section of the property I want to check out. It's actually a bit of ways away from the fort proper, but I do want to check it out. I think it's going to be cool. One thing I do want to show you guys really quick is the external view of Fort Mansfield. This is the outside of what the fort looks like. Pretty cool place. You can see there's lots of fences covering the area, but you also got a lot of graffiti and of course the beautiful scenery around it. Lots of beach grass and brush. Obviously it's a cold February day, so the plants aren't in full bloom, but nonetheless it's really cool. It got a good view of Fort Mansfield here. And right over there, if you're wondering, is Watch Hill. It's a village in Westerly, Rhode Island. Pretty cool area. Yeah, it's genuinely a beautiful day, and this is a beautiful fort. It's pretty small, a little smaller than I expected, but really cool fort nonetheless. And I'm gonna bring you guys to the next part of the property. I think it should be fun, so let's check it out. Hey, so fun fact guys, while I was exploring Fort Mansfield on my way to the second part of the property, met another cool avid YouTuber here. This is actually Tim of TC's World on YouTube.
How's it going, guys?
So he's also filming a video on Fort Mansfield. Again, his YouTube channel is TC's World. Definitely check that out if you want a different perspective of Fort Mansfield. He's filming his own video, so that should be pretty cool. Got anything to say about this fort?
I've known about it a long time, and this guy schooled me on the history of it because I didn't know the proper history. Yeah. So that'll definitely make my video a little bit better. So thanks, man.
He's known about this for a long time, so yeah, you're definitely the expert in my opinion. You've known this for a couple of years. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Check out TC's World on YouTube. Yeah, he's gonna have his own video on Fort Mansfield. Does a lot of hiking and all that kind of stuff I like too. So definitely check that out. Yeah, thanks for coming in. So before we get to the next part of this fort, I just got to show you this absolutely stunning view over there. Of course, that's part of Napatree Point, and then you got Watch Hill all the way over there. Really beautiful. Anyways, here we are on the second part of Fort Mansfield. Now, this was probably one of the major cannons or guns that were here. As you can see, they got a massive battery right here. It actually circles around. We can walk around, check it out. Very big gun, I'm sure. You know what I mean? Again, I don't remember all the guns that were used here off the top of my head, but I will say they had a lot of guns, a lot of weaponry in this fort. Actually, that's Fort Mansfield proper that we saw earlier. Pretty cool. Yeah, let's see if we can get down here. Okay, here we are at the ground level. Again, you got the battery right here, which probably housed a massive gun. Completely filled up with random shit like rocks and plants and trees. But other than that, got a cool little area here. Some other sort of hole right there. Just curious what's over here. Also, I'll say this place is super overgrown, and I'm here in the winter, you know what I mean? Like, I'm here in the winter when all of the plants are dead, there's no foliage. I can only imagine what this is like in the summer. It's probably fucking filled. All right, let's head down here. So another thing I want to mention, as I said, this place was officially abandoned in 1928. but it really started to be liquidated and emptied out by 1909 because of those failed war games where the military found that it was actually flawed and had a major blind spot. That should probably give you a context of the timeline we're referring to here with Fort Mansfield. This fort, contrary to popular belief, had nothing to do with World War II. It was actually only used in the early 20th century, if anything closer to World War I. Although ironically, when World War I broke out and the US became involved, they actually moved some of their weapons here from Fort Mansfield to the Western Front in Europe. So even though this fort was semi-active during World War I, it wasn't really a World War I fort. It was really only properly active from 1901 to 1909, and then from there they had very sparing uses of soldiers and weapons. So again, very short-lived fort, but a cool one nonetheless. That's another view of the ocean right there, although that's not the Long Island Sound side. Napatree Point is a peninsula that juts out into the middle of the ocean. So right over there is the Rhode Island and Connecticut coastline. Pretty cool. So there's one other section over here I'm gonna make my way to. And my God, this brush is so thick. I'm gonna make my way over there and I'll meet you guys when I get there. Okay guys, I found the other gunner right here. Or the other battery, I should say. This one's definitely a lot bigger than the other. Actually, pretty massive. So they probably had another huge cannon right here, I'm sure, you know, facing out at the ocean. If any enemy naval fleets were ever coming by to the Long Island Sound, you know, maybe they were trying to attack New York City or, I don't know, New Haven or Bridgeport, any other major cities in the area, Fort Mansfield would be one of the first they'd come across. Of course, that never happened, actually, and the major war of the early 20th century was World War I in Europe, so it didn't even reach the American East Coast. But I'm sure that would have been a disaster anyways for Fort Mansfield, considering its major flaw it had. All right, let's see if we can get down here. I am genuinely astonished by how much brush there is. It's super hard to get in here. I'm doing a lot of crouching and sneaking in between all these plants. It's pretty wild. Got another little underground area right here. Pretty cool. And another right here. Pretty dope. Pretty cool, guys. So I think that's really about it for Fort Mansfield. It is actually a pretty small fort. You really just got these two gunners right here and then the fort itself. You know, not super big, but still a really cool place to check out, and I'm glad I came. Hey, thank you guys again for joining me. I've been JMass as always, and this has been another dope New England adventure. And I'm glad you guys could join me because this was a pretty fun one. Today we checked out Fort Mansfield, an abandoned military fort here in the beautiful town of Westerly, Rhode Island, right on the tip of Napatree Point, right alongside the village of Watch Hill. Really beautiful and scenic area, and I'm kind of glad we checked it out in the winter because I'm sure this place would be super overgrown in the summer. Fort Mansfield, of course, just to recap, was constructed in 1901, although the military found a fatal flaw with this thing in 1907 when they realized it had a major blind spot that could be taken advantage of by enemy attacks. So they eventually liquidated it in 1909, and it was steadily and slowly abandoned and things were removed until 1928 when it was officially abandoned. Today, Fort Mansfield is open to the public. You can come here no problem, check it out, explore. I would still recommend it. I think it's a really cool place, and the beach alone on Napatree Point is gorgeous. But anyways, I've been JMass, another abandoned fort for the books, Fort Mansfield, right alongside Long Island Sound. I'll catch you guys in the next one, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at JMassOfficial. That's at JMassOfficial on Instagram. And also don't forget about Tim, TC's World on YouTube. Check that out. He's going to have his own Fort Mansfield video, and I'm sure his camera quality is going to be a little better. So check that out. I think it's going to be cool, and thanks for joining me, guys.